Hey everybody, this is Harry. Want to contribute to this weekly chat. They're talking about Buster Keaton versus Charlie Chaplin films, and yeah, I don't look so fat there. There we go. Anyways, I've watched Mike's video. I watched Ian's video take on because he just did a marathon of Buster Keaton films, um, and he did a top five of Keaton's films that he liked. And I wanted to throw my 2 cents in, seeing that Mike threw his 1 cent in. The differences between Keaton and Chaplin. I'm a big fan of both of them. More towards Buster Keaton than I do Chaplin. I do adore Chaplin and his work. And, you know, and even though if you want to compare those two, Chaplin is probably the better of the two, because he wrote his material. Buster Keaton wrote some of his, but there was a lot of production that went into Chaplin's films. It took a long time to produce some of these films that he made over the course of his career, where Buster Keaton did about 17, well, no, maybe 20 some odd films with Fatty Arbuckle when he first started out shorts, and then started doing his own feature films as well as doing short subjects or short films during that time period. But the reason why I like Buster Keaton more than I do Chaplin is just because Buster Keaton is, as put in words, a stuntman. Like Ian has puts it, a stuntman. There's more to his films, more excitement. I find myself laughing a lot more, comedy-wise. Chaplin was a good comic, but he wasn't a physical comedy comedian as Buster Keaton was, or Harold Lloyd for that matter. Keaton's films, he took risks doing stuff, risked his neck. He actually broke his neck in a film. Didn't even know it for years until he had some problems, and he went to the doctor and kind of find out he had hurt himself doing a stunt. I'm not particular. I can't remember the film that it was, but I remember he was coming out of a water tower at a train station and landed on the rails, and then that's when he had hurt himself. But he was more physical comedy, and I found that more entertaining to me. Chaplin's films are very sentimental. Like The Kid, City Lights, a lot of sentimentality into them, which I enjoy. I really do enjoy. I'm not saying, it's always hard to try to say who is the best. Like I said, Chaplin, it was probably the better filmmaker, but the most enjoyment I ever got was out of Buster Keaton. The Navigator, which is one of my favorites. Our Hospitality, which is my favorite. The first Keaton film I ever watched was Our Hospitality back in the 80s. It was on PBS. It aired back then after it had been remastered, or not remastered, but where it got a restoration. And Carl Davis, I believe, was the one who did the orchestral score for the film. That's when I fell in love with Buster Keaton right there. Chaplin I knew from years ago prior, because when I was in school in New York, we would have these days where you're stuck in school because of the snow, the ice, whatever, and we would watch films, Three Stooges films and such, and the Gold Rush, as a matter of fact, on a winter's day would be the film that we would watch during that time, and that's how I was introduced to Charlie Chaplin, and also through PBS, because late at night during the summer, I would stay up, sneak, because I used to have a TV in my room, and watch short subjects. short silent films. Like The Rink is the one that comes to mind back in the early 70s. When I lived in Long Beach, New York, is watching Charlie Chaplin in The Rink, where he's on the roller skates and he's fighting a heavyset guy, in the roller rink. And I was just amazed, floored by that. So it's hard to say. I have a big collection of both films, Chaplin's and Buster Keaton's. I have all of Chaplin's except for the Countess of New York, or Hong Kong, Countess of Hong Kong, the King of New York I have. I have all his films. I've watched every film, short from, the Mutuals to the Keystone and the Mutual, on up. And like I said, I enjoy his movies very much. Buster Keaton, and I have most of his films. I have all his feature films, the silent feature films. I have most of his MGM films that he made afterwards, his talkies that he made with some of them with Jimmy Durante, that he made, like the Doughboys, What's Up Beer, I think is what it's called, Bedroom Parlor, which was made at his house in California. So I have a lot of his talkie films, and a lot of them are not that great, but they're entertaining. And it's to each their own preference. They each had a different style, and I heard Ian say that James thought that Buster Keaton was a Chaplin wannabe. There were plenty of those around, but Buster Keaton was never a Chaplin wannabe. He did his own films the way he did them and tried to make money off them, even though The General, which was his classic, his masterpiece, never made the money back that he had put into it. Till years later, at re-showings and such like that, and Buster has been gone since then. So, and then they were talking about Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd was probably the first silent film actor or comedian that I knew. Not personally, but from watching on PBS. PBS was a big thing. We only had 3 channels, and they never played silent films, but you get PBS, and you can watch these things. And they had the Comedy World, I think it was called, of Harold Lloyd. And I was introduced to his films, were re-edited, cut for this program that used to be on there, and it was Hooray for Harold Lloyd. It was the theme song for that. You can find it on YouTube if you're curious, you want to know what that is. But that's how he was the first one I've ever known comedy. I watched that and I laughed my butt off because it was just, there was always a guy talking over it saying, "Oh, poor Harold," with that old, accent they used to use in the 30s and 40s. "Oh, poor Harold got himself in trouble." So I love his films. I don't have a big collection of his. I have what came out on Criterion, but I've watched all his films. Was able to rent a lot of them through Netflix and stuff. They have a box set of Harold Lloyd films out that was through his estate, and a lot of the films were remastered. Harold Lloyd, there was 3 big comedy stars back in the day, in the silent era. Chaplin was 1, Buster was number 2, and Harold Lloyd was number 3. And early there was a 4th one that never ever gets talked about. It was Harry Langdon. Because most of his films are kind of hard to find now, but he was the 4th biggest silent film comedian back then. And then there's Charlie Chase, who did a lot of films with Laurel and Hardy. He also directed a lot of films for them as well. Sons of the Desert, he's in Sons of the Desert, Charlie Chase. Anyways, I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in that both of them, Chaplin and Keaton, are 2 different kind of comedians, that they presented their stuff differently. Like I said, Chaplin was more a sentimentalist, where Keaton was more action, thrills, and such. Harold Lloyd, check him out. I'm trying to find his movies. Grandma's Boy is a great film to watch as well. thank you for my rambling, listening to my rambling. And y'all have a good day. Maybe see you sometime soon.